am so excited today. I have Carla Fowler, MD, PhD, founder of Faxa, an elite executive coach. She's fantastic, friends. Like, you know how I live in the trenches? She marries the science to the outcome, and we're going to learn so much to apply to your lives and start improving where you are. So, Carla, thank you.
Jenn, thank you so much for having me. I am psyched for our conversation. I've been looking forward to it all week.
Yay! That's awesome. Okay, so I'm going to start us with the first question from my question bank right here. You often speak about marrying science and performance. Can you share a personal moment where scientific insight transformed your own performance or perspective?
Oh, goodness. Great question. So I think one of the really interesting things is that this idea of thinking about time, right? There are lots of things we can adjust in our life, but there are also some things that are total constraints, right? And this is just thinking about the science, like the physics of the world, right? We each get 24 hours in our day. And so I think one of the things as I was going through career life, we'll probably get into some of this, but I was always interested in doing lots of different things at once. So this was like going through my MD, PhD training program. But I had like pretty hands-off mentors, and the class schedule, they gave you syllabi. So sometimes you could miss class. And so I was like, I want to be a big athlete on the side. Like that is a dream I have, and I want that. So I was like, well, how do we figure out the time? The problem here to figure out is time. And one of the interesting things was to say, all right, well then part of performance here, if I want all of these things, like I want to play for an elite level ultimate Frisbee team, and I want, like, hopefully we will, go to the national championships, win the national championships. How are you going to figure that out with everything else you have going on? And so this really points to, I think, one of the principles scientifically that we can all focus on, which is actually the concept of brutal focus. This idea of saying, hey, at some point, like hard work, perseverance, absolutely a piece of our performance. But one of the important things also is, how do you select where are you going to put your energy? Where are you going to spend your time, your training, whatever it is? And that how we select is actually a piece of our performance. Even like what goal we choose is an important piece of our performance. Like I have been waiting to say this all week, but one of the things I love, Jenn, is like your record, like the second 7 summits, I love and fascinates me because of like, perhaps people don't know this, but the degree of difficulty that actually represents and what an interesting goal it is and why it's notable. I'm not going to fill in the blanks because you lived it, but just that what we select as our goal, even where we put our focus and how notable that is. So anyways, this is one of the first scientific things that I think is we often miss in performance is this idea of you have limited time. How do you select where you're going to put that?
Yeah. How do you select where you're going to put yours?
Well, one of the ways that I think about this is this like idea of, I call it proper accounting, super mathy. Okay. I know, but I think it's really helpful. And actually, I totally give credit to my husband for like coining this term very early in our relationship, which was particularly when you have 2 high performing people who have goals and are driven and are ambitious and like want to go after things. And I think it was at the time I was both starting my coaching practice. So I had pivoted out of medicine. I'm building a business from scratch. I don't have any business training. And at the same time, I'm like, I think I might like to run ultra marathons. Like,
of course,
I think
those short things that take no time,
and on trails, like not on flat. Like I would like to do ones that have a lot of elevation involved.
Yeah. You should be moving to Park City. Come on.
Oh, we did our first trail marathon, like just 26 miles in Park City. It had like, I forget. It was like one of the North Face series, and it had 6,000 feet up, 6,000 feet down over the course of the whole thing, 26 miles on trail. You were basically running the ski area at Park City.
And, like the mid-mountain trail thing. Yes, for sure.
One of the things we realized is like, you have to think about how much time will it take to train and do what you want to do? And you have to like think about the other pieces of your life. Like, how much sleep do you actually need to support like what you're trying to do, maybe business wise, or what are you trying to do athletically? It also, you have to think about if there are important relationships in your life that really like feed you, and, you know, make your life great. And so we came up with this term proper accounting to say it's worth taking some time to map out realistically over what timeline do you want to accomplish the goal? And also, how much time can you invest in that each week? And then start to say, all right, well, how are you going to get all that to fit to set yourself up for success versus like cramming it all together?
Yeah, no, it's a thing. I love that. So in your work, you focus on helping leaders achieve exceptional results. What's one piece of advice that you give that applies universally to anyone pursuing ambitious goals?
The thing that I always say is give yourself some time to think. And this is like protect some time. So literally like map it into your calendar. And the reason this is my one trick to rule them all, even though I usually resist the idea, there's lots of things that are important. There's not just one thing, but I think even in athletic pursuits, there is so much that starts with having some time, like with your brain, like to actually decide, like, what do you want? What's going to be most important for that? What are you actually willing to spend for that? What I mean, like time-wise, effort-wise, energy-wise,
emotionally, spiritually, physically, all the components of cost.
We don't stumble into big goals. And I think we need some time to even just get adjusted to and ask ourselves, like, okay, do I really want that? Like, what am I willing to give up for that? And the world tends to not give us space to think. Like, as you know, like tons of interruptions, our phones, our workplaces. There's just a lot of noise and things going on. And so I find that for us to, whether you're leading a business or like working to climb your next big peak, having some time to like think that out, map it out. And so again, so that you can actually then realize that plan is really important. And I think it feels like a luxury, but it's not a luxury. It's actually a piece of performance.
Exactly. How do you help clients stay process-oriented under pressure?
Oh, this is a great question because I love the interplay between like results or like sort of destination goal orientation versus the process one's running to like move you forward to get progress. So I often work to have us have some flexibility from the start. And here's sort of what that looks like. I always do ask clients, like, what are their goals? Or even more simply, I often just ask, what is it you want to have happen? Could be what you want to be different. And then we kind of explore and put some concreteness to that. But then we also talk about different topics and questions to try and understand what's actually most important. Like, what are the most important levers they have to pull that we think would move them towards those goals? You know, we don't have unlimited time or focus. And so the first thing we do is talk about the goals, but then start to define what would be important pieces of the process. So a great example of this could be like, all right, if there's an entrepreneur who is working on fundraising, right? They're doing their next round. And one of the things we might talk about is both, they have goals about how much they want to raise, how important it is they raise that. But we'll also talk about on a day-to-day basis, what would it look like for them to run the fundraising process, right? How many emails do they need to send? Sometimes we have to actually say, okay, the goal's out there. We've defined what it is. It's like, you know, the path or what's the route? What's the route you're going to take to the top? But then say, okay, but now let's just think about like this day, build a good day. What would it look like to make it potent? And so that's one of the things I think about is really this idea of, can you break it down and help them have clarity about the process versus saying, I somehow have to get up there, but I don't know how I'm going to connect those dots.
I think this is magic because that whole process oriented gives us a sense of control in a very volatile environment, whether we're fundraising or climbing a mountain or running a trail, right? So it's like, okay, I can focus on these things. And for me, like where this process comes into play that's really helpful, I will have days where I have like a ton of energy. And so my body was like, let's send 25. If 10's good, 25's better.
Absolutely.
But the problem with that is that if you do 25, like the next day, you're like, and I have nothing. I'm like, I used it all yesterday, so I'm out of it or whatever. And so it's pacing yourself and taking that emotion out and being like, yes, I could. But if I do, like, how does that affect the rest of the week? And just saying, okay, here's our process. Here's our goal. I'm just going to work the process because it allows me to level myself out a little bit and not do all these highs and lows that are harder to recover from.
That's so interesting. And it's hard, right? Like if you're a person who knows how to really drive yourself to not on the day when you feel good, just max it out and overtrain.
Okay. So my podcast, a huge theme of it is resilience. And can you share a story when you faced a significant setback and applied your high performance strategies to navigate it?
Yeah, there's definitely, I have had other setbacks. This is not my only setback, obviously, but this very clearly, the thing that comes to mind for me was the sort of moment or many moments when I was realizing like I had come through 10 years of training. I got my MD, I got my PhD. I was a general surgery resident at Stanford. So like working 80-hour weeks. And I was like, oh no, like, I don't think this is quite the right match, for my passion and what I want to see my life look like. Mm-hmm. Not that I can't do it. Absolutely. It was going great. And it was fine. But I was like, there's so much about this that isn't working. Like the amount of sleep I get, I lost all my muscle mass in that entire year because I not a lot of time to eat, not a lot of time to sleep, hypermetabolic.
Right.
And you just look at that and think, that's not sustainable. And it, as much as I loved the impact I could have, I had this thought of I think I want to be a transplant surgeon. And yet I looked at it and you're trying to add up the pieces of who you were before, right? This total multi-channel life, be an athlete, study hard, play hard, and have multiple things in your life that make it rich and interesting. And I was like, if I choose this, it will absolutely be hardcore. And it will be one play. I will get one play.
Yeah.
And I think I just knew that I wasn't willing to have only one play.
What was your aha moment in that? Because my aha moments typically come from outside of me and someone says something to me and then I'm like, oh, did you come to these ideas by yourself or did something happen and then all of a sudden you're like, okay, wait, hold the brakes. Let me reevaluate.
I think there were both internal things and external things.
Okay,
so
awesome.
For example, my now husband, fiance at the time, it was very clear. I was like, oh wow, we do not have a lot of time together. And when you start to feel like you're wedging relationships into a small corner of your life and not doubles. This isn't I love how you artfully you're I have time with friends and we're going to go hike. We're going to do these wonderful, healthy things. There wasn't really room to even do doubles right.
That. You're not coming into my surgery ward with me, but thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. No, no field trips.
Yeah. Sorry.
And I think the people who love you let you know, right? And they also let you know when they're you don't look happy. It's not about, are you tough enough? It's not about, you can do this.
Right.
But...
It's that narrative. Does that, right? That narrative is well, I don't quit or I don't do this or I'm the person that finishes. Yeah. And it's that limiting belief that can send you on a path way longer than what you're supposed to be that allows you to be your best self.
It was interesting because in some ways it was the right room for some reasons. I think this is even more difficult when you're no, there are things about this that are totally the right room. And yet you have to look at the whole package of yourself. And I wasn't a person who grew up thinking I want to be a doctor, that identity, that's going to be my identity. I think I was much more a person who followed the path, looked for what were the opportunities that seemed to fit and wasn't afraid of a challenge. But that for me, it was always much more about what are things that are going to pull out the most of me and be the fullest expression of everything I have to offer. And I realized that there were things about the time crunched nature of really being in our medical system, which is just, and thank goodness for all the amazing doctors we have. But there's just not a lot of time to, for example, express like some of the things I get to do in coaching now to really like support people in their decision-making and in their achievement. And I looked at it and thought, I need to reorient the pieces. And I can take a lot from my training in both the science training and the medical training, but I need to like reorient them. And I probably need to do something independently because that way I will like gain back that ability to use time potently to say, I can have multiple ambitious goals as long as I get to arrange how the schedule works. I can make it happen. But I'll tell you, leaving medicine is really tough. You leave a whole tribe. It's not a popular decision. Everyone is like, why? Like you put in so much effort. And also then you're starting a business and you're at zero and you don't have anything to show for it.
No, you have things to show for it. A lot of exhaustion, a lot of time, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of like, what did I just do? And no one's like, right? You have all that definitely on your team. So crazy. How do you balance like mental toughness that's required for high performance with the need for rest and recovery?
That's interesting. Well, I'll tell you one thing. After I left residency, it was very clear that I had not had a creative thought for months, just because of like exhaustion, sleep deprivation. So the first thing I did was like, I did nothing for I literally called my shot and said, I'm not going to start a business. I'm not doing anything for 3 months. I'm just going to sleep.
Good for you. That's amazing.
It was, you need to reset yourself because your body and your mind have just undergone like an incredibly stressful like period of time. Certainly when it's at the extreme, I can sort of like tell or say, okay, something needs to change here. But I think our goal in life is not to get to that point where you've like burned out so much that you can't. And so some of this is like, I try to plan in or like block out and say, I sort of know myself and I know where the edges are and I can certainly push past an edge, but the norm, what does a normal day look like, needs to have some certain things. And so, for example, I sleep like 8 or 9 hours a night. Can I get by with 7? Oh, I can get by, but I understand that like I am not at my best if I'm pushing on that boundary. I think the other thing is, after like lots of sort of weekend worrying during my 30s, like when I was starting my business and all of that, when I was out of like more of a formalized training program that I had in like college crew, that I had when I was training for Ultimate Frisbee, that I learned that like, like as you're no longer invincible and in your 20s, like your body does not respond to training in the same way. So I used to be able to ramp up for a sports season really quickly. And over this course of time, I've learned like, okay, I got to treat my body a little bit better. There's more mobility and different things that are required. And so some of that again comes back to time. You have to say, okay, well, if I need to spend this much time warming up before like I go to the gym and start lifting, then, okay, well, you got to think about where that time comes from. But if you do that, then your runway for like how long over the course of your life, how many athletic chapters could you have? Or even with business, right? If you say, how do I say what's a good growth trajectory that doesn't burn me out and make me want to stop doing, whatever it is you're doing within like 10 years, right?
Well, yeah. And I think we learn it as athletes with like training periodization. Right. Yes. So it's like you ramp up and then you take a break and then you ramp up and you take a break so your body can integrate that training and then apply it to the next season and like keep going from that. And if we look at our lives with that lens of this is a season that's got to feed the next season. This isn't like we're not using everything to the end here. But my favorite thing that you've said so far is your cue was you weren't creative. I think that's a cue that applies to so many of us. If you're running at Mach speed, because your brain doesn't have space to play and we're designed to play.
Right. Like, and I think I was very reactive. So this is a thing we can notice in our brains is that, when we're like, oh, I can react to what's happening. But if you ask me to sort of proactively say, okay, well, what do I want to have happen? What do I want to create? What might I want to build? What would I be willing to sort of stretch for? Like there was none of that. And so this sort of ties back to that idea we talked about earlier of saying, how do you create some space for your brain to think more expansively, not just react to like whatever is happening right in this moment?
Oh, I love that. Okay, awesome. All right. I believe we can rewrite our narratives. Have you ever helped a client completely reframe their story to unlock new performance levels? And what was the process that you took your client through?
The answer is yes. And I think story is so important for us. Like as human beings, like this is part of how we see what is the truth or what is the truth that we are going to move forward with. And it's very compelling to us, both the stories we tell others and then how they view us, but also obviously the story you tell yourself. Like I'm thinking of an example with a client where they were like firing on a lot of different cylinders and they just had like, they were a founder and they were building a challenging like organization and they had come really far, but like had an idea that they weren't somehow weren't organized enough, or they were like missing a tool or missing something. And that was a little bit of like the narrative versus saying like, no, that like, that's not true. You're not missing something. And certainly, I mean, there were plenty of things we talked about, but that as a narrative, actually founding an organization, integrating it into different partnerships in a community to make it work, like is just challenging. There's a lot of politics you've got to align. And so some of what I do when we're reorienting a story is actually try to lay out, highlight things someone might be discounting about themselves. Like, well, that's easy for me, so I'm not going to give myself any credit. Well, a lot of times things that are easy for you are extraordinary to someone else. Yeah. And so one of the things we try to do is like highlight things they might be discounting.
Oh, I love that. That's so good.
That's number one.
Well, and like for me, I can think of a friend of mine that I helped recently, had a successful business, exited, went into another business, and it was a failure, and then was going to start a third business and was so hesitant because kept playing the failure tape over and over and over again. And so then wasn't making decisions from the place of power, but a place of fear. Yeah. And so just dissecting that story and being like, that was then, what's different now? And why does that not apply to now? So they didn't keep getting sucked into a fear story that they were replaying.
Absolutely. And I think that's so important. I mean, it's what you said. You're like, failure will happen. This is a thing. If you want to go do big things, you're going to like come upon this point at multiple times through all of the chapters of your life and what you're trying to do.
As leaders, we often face conflicting advice.
Yes.
And how do you help people cut through the noise and make decisions that align with their vision?
This is great. And it's so true. I mean, I'm even remembering when I started my business and I got like lots of advice of like, oh, you got to have a blog, you got to do this, you got to do that. And these were all like helpful people, like only wanting the best for me. But also you can't do everything. And also like you are your own person. And so what is good advice for you may be really different from what was good advice for someone else. And so one of the things that I like to help people separate is, for example, like if someone who's really smart, right, gave you advice, you might feel like, I don't know if that's the right fit for me, but do I ignore advice from someone who I think is like, I really respect or like is really smart? So sometimes I just try and help people look at like, what are all the options like as they're making a decision? And so I often like to think about the process of making a decision, not just like saying, well, I want to make the decision that turns out well. And so I often like to look at like, what are the things that would influence your process, right? So for example, if you really respect someone and part of what might influence whether or not you take that advice has to do with caring about the relationship or not wanting to look dumb or, or even saying, well, how do I trust maybe an inner voice or an inner wisdom I have or self-knowledge about myself as much as I might trust an external force? And And so we just try and look at like, what are the things that might have an outsized impact on how you think about just a decision? And so it helps us sort of say like, it might even be like if you're like, for example, you're on a boat, right? And you're like pointing the boat in this direction, but it's like identifying what are the currents that are going to take you off trajectory, even as you're like, but I'm pointing this way.
Right.
And so I think we try to explore some of those things so that we can.
Well, you're installing filters, right?
Yeah.
Like you're helping people be like, okay, yeah, that is a great idea. Obviously, it's worked for that person. But now let's filter that into your constraints in life and skills and sets. And does that apply to you? Because everybody's giving us advice with good intention. And it's our job to start to distinguish, okay, does that really apply to me just because it was a winning formula for them?
Absolutely. I love that.
Okay, so emotional intelligence, right? It's a thing that you have to achieve high performance. How do leaders develop this skill to better lead their teams?
I think one important thing for leaders is like, how do you help your team know how to win? Like this idea that underneath it all, like everyone has different skill sets, like not everyone is motivated in the same way, but generally speaking, like people want to feel like they are contributing. And they want to know how to do that, right? Like, and I think this is one piece where this idea of like clarity about like what is the goal, what's most important. Now we can translate that into teams, and that as you have a team that is working to align with itself, that they want to know. They want to know as a leader, like where are we headed, and also like what's most important for us to be focused on. And for each individual, like, what is my role? How do I contribute? Like, what will be most important that I can bring? And then being recognized for that, like really being seen.
Right? Yeah.
And yet, what's funny is we can know all those things. And one of the things I love about performance science is being able to work back and say, well, how do you actually help people feel seen? Like, how does one do that? And I have found that often with leaders, if we can get them back to being able to have mental clarity and then to be able to articulate to their teams like what they most want to have happen and dialogue with their teams about that, and then even say, hey, here's where each person fits in, or even to say, have the team say, hey, I could contribute that. This is what I'm really good at. I would love to work on that, is really powerful. But like even being able to break down like, well, what does it mean to be seen or to have a team be motivated, and break that back down into something around focus and clarity. Like what's something a leader controls that they could offer to their team to help line that up.
Okay, so you bring a scientific lens to leadership and high performance. What's a surprising research insight that most people overlook, but has the power to change everything?
Oh, this is a great one. This is about stress, which is great because, of course, you are going to have stress when you are doing challenging things, when you are leading a business, if you are climbing a mountain, like there are things you want to accomplish and things that really matter. But one of the really interesting things, and there's a great book by Kelly McGonigal about this called The Upside of Stress, is that how we think about stress, like what is our mindset on stress, actually changes how our biology responds.
Isn't that fascinating?
It is fascinating. We will all have stress in our lives when there are things that matter to us. In fact, when one is feeling stress, one of the first things to note that can be a different reframing of it is that I have some stress because there is something at stake here that I care a lot about. That can be people in your life, right? Relationships you care about. It could be a goal that you really care about. But I loved this understanding that when they actually studied people, they found like, number one, that actually people who reported no stress often had more challenges than people who had moderate levels of stress. And that one thought behind that was that it was because if you don't have any stress, it may be a sign that like you might be disconnected and really like
disassociated with what's going on. Yeah.
So I love the idea that rather than saying we're trying to eliminate the stress in our life, to say we're trying to like create some mindsets and healthy perspectives when we're feeling the stress that can change like what is that impact on our bodies.
Ah, no, that's huge. And I crave stress because it's like at some level, right? Because to me, when you think of it from a physical standpoint, that stress makes you stronger. Right. And so I need to stress the muscle so the muscle can grow so it can perform better. And so when you have that narrative of, okay, what is this preparing me for next? It doesn't turn stress into this thing where it puts me in victim mentality. It puts stress in my life of, okay, this is serving me. My story is how. Mm-hmm. So how do you help leaders redefine their limits and expand their perception of what's possible? Do you see any parallels between mindset and physical performance?
Different people like different styles with different folks is what I would say about this. And I think some of coaching is getting to know a person. And I often think about both. I always hold like what it is they want to accomplish. But I also, people have different paces. So I like to understand like what is the pace one can sort of nudge someone at. And some of that is you ask questions about like maybe you offer up some new experiments they could run, right? If they were going to like try something differently, like, present in a different way. Let's say they're developing their executive presence and like some things they could try. I put some things on the table, and it's always interesting to say, well, what are you comfortable with? Like, what could you just go out and do tomorrow? Okay, great. So now we've established what that is. But then I like to say, well, if you're going to push yourself a little bit, like, or just, like how far outside that, would you be like, I don't want to do that, but okay, I would. Right. Mm-hmm, and you just start to calibrate, because I think people have comfort zone. They have stretch zone. Like what's their edge? And I like to understand what's a healthy edge, and people have different amounts that they're willing to go for. I have a track record of in some ways being willing to like run off the cliff and build a parachute on the way down. And that is me. I mean, I like walked onto the crew team. I was like, this will be great. I've never rowed in my life, but hey,
but let's do this. I'm here for it. Yes, totally.
I'm here. Not everyone is like that, but you can incrementally push people's edge as long as they don't feel like burned by the experience. And that's what I try and calibrate for.
Yeah, I love that too. And not being burned by the experience, because I once did get burned by the experience. And so I'm going to share this with people to help illustrate this point. So when I first moved to Park City, I worked at the ski hill as a ski instructor for no reason but to get ingrained into the community, get a few free lessons,
you would know
and
everyone.
And give back, right? Like, I mean, that's how you get ingrained in a community. So I'm teaching, and I'm a new teacher or whatever. And so I'm bringing these people on the bunny hill, and I'm like, I think they're doing good. So I'm going to take them on this upper like level hill to show them how good they're doing. And the problem was, it was like after lunch, everybody was tired. They needed to go on an easier hill to like reinforce what they learned. Then it was bad timing to put them on a harder hill to remind them what they don't know. It was utter carnage. Like, I'm not kidding you. I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know if we're going to make it down this run. I had to call my supervisor and be like, I made a mistake. Can you help me get these people down this hill and do what we can? And it's one of those things where you want to push people to their edges. But if you go past that, it is a lot more work to recover and get them back into where they need to go. Rookie mistake. I did it. I'm sorry to all those little ladies that were skiing. I'm sure they've recovered at this point in time. But it is that balance of like, I have 7 kids. I parent 7 different ways, the same values and philosophies that we run as a family. And so when you're working with individuals or with your team, like, you need to know, okay, what's that person's edge? How do I push them to it, but not over it? Because when you go over it, it can sometimes stall you back, and it's more work to get to where you're going. But it's an art and a science at some level.
It is. And I love you have like this amazing ecosystem, like in your home of like 7 amazing people, and you get to learn with all of them.
Okay, so high performance, we've talked about this a few times, often involves learning from failure. Is there any scientific or psychological approach to bouncing back faster after failure?
In some ways, I think there are pluses and minuses to like how fast you come back. I think there's a process. People go through it in like different speeds. So, but I think one important thing is what are the feelings you have about it? Are there feelings that like aren't helpful? Like disappointment is real. Like, I think if we're going to do big things, like the point is not to ever tell ourselves that we can't be disappointed, right? But I think feeling like shame, for example, about the whatever was the failure, like that's not often like a helpful like rebuilding emotion. And so sometimes it's worth exploring, like, do I feel like I need to be embarrassed about something? Like, why do I feel that way? Like, I went after something big, and what do I have to be proud of for the fact that I went after something big, or something that was, even if it wasn't big, something that was a stretch for you? And so I think kind of taking some time to process the emotions. Some people can figure out what they're feeling more quickly than others. And so, but I think it may be about working through some of the steps. Another step is like, what did I learn?
So I agree. I think failure, when we look at it as a data point and we take the emotion out of it and just say, okay, what did I learn? How can I extract from this? I wrote the book Break Proof. And it's not that we don't break. It's that that break gives us proof of what was working, what wasn't, how we continue, and to keep going forward with whatever we're pursuing. So when we expect failure to be part of the process and take the emotional sting out of it and don't pile on shame, guilt, and all those different pieces, we're able to still climb our mountain and get to the top.
Absolutely.
Okay, we have covered so many amazing things. I could talk to you for days. We might need to do an extra episode sometime to go over more of this stuff. But to acknowledge everybody's listening time today, how do we follow you, reach out to you, learn more about all things Carla Fowler?
Well, Jenn, this has been so fun. I would relish another hour. Maybe we'll do it a different time.
Yeah,
but
perfect.
A great place to follow me is I'm on LinkedIn. So I'm always posting like conversations I have about performance there and some content. So I'm at Carla-Fowler. And then my website's another great place to visit. And so I've got lots of conversations posted there as well. And a great FAQ section around coaching. And that is at Faxa.com, THAXA.
Great. Thank you so much, Carla. Have a great day.
Thanks, Jenn.